Okay, hello everybody. Oh, it's nice with an open window. So now we welcome Hembæk Svensson, and he is appointed member of the core working group of the EU's blockchain Observatory, focusing on use cases and transitions towards a new economy. And he also assists Concordial, and is a new blockchain platform for financial infrastructure. So yes, welcome Bo.
Thank you. Thank you. Everybody speaks Danish, or should I stay in English? English? Okay, we'll keep it in English. As mentioned, I hope you can hear me because there is some noise I can hear from the outside. But as was mentioned before, I am a member of the EU Blockchain Observatory, which is an institution that was created a year ago by the EU Commission. And the purpose of the observatory, and I will discuss this a bit more in detail a bit later, it is to, it almost is within the wording, it is to keep an eye on what is going on within blockchain and to be a resource for the Commission and for the EU Parliament. And there is a lot of really interesting things going on in EU. As of now, if you look at this from a political perspective, and if you look all over the world and you say who is actually driving this, who is actually having some serious discussions about blockchain, then EU is actually leading within the world, all the world's different institutions right now. It's not very clear, it's still something that has to surface, but there's a lot of things going on. And I would like to make a walkthrough of those to introduce you to what are the specific initiatives and what sort of consequence does this have for the financial sector going forward, especially in the strategic, which is a 10-year perspective. I have been working with blockchain for full time now for 3 years. Before that, I've been working with technologies for the financial sector and the financial industry. And I've been working with software for all my life. So my perspective on blockchain is a software perspective. And I have to admit that even though I've been working very intensely with this for quite some years now, I'm still on the learning curve. And I think we all are, because one of the really interesting things about blockchain is that this is novelty. This is something which enables us to do things that we couldn't do before. So something new is emerging. So I just want to stress that we are all on a learning curve. And if somebody says, "Oh, I get it, I know everything about blockchain," then they don't. So please, raise questions. Let us make this as much a dialogue and a conversation as possible. I need my glasses. I've reached this age where I have to have reading glasses, and don't wish for it. 10 years ago, we saw the first blockchain application pop up. It was Bitcoin. And if we look at what has happened over those 10 years, then of course a lot has happened. There's a lot of other technologies that has emerged along with Bitcoin. But Bitcoin is a story by itself. Because if you look at Bitcoin, I think we have to close the windows, this is really noisy. If you look at Bitcoin, it's been around for 10 years now. It hasn't been hacked. It is an autonomous thing that is out there on the internet. Nobody owns it. And yet it has been able to create an economy around itself that allows it to pay for its own computing power. And it pays for the brain power that is needed to keep it going and to keep it evolving. And evolving is exactly what Bitcoin is doing. If you look at what is happening out there, you have probably all heard about the forks, that you have this Bitcoin, you have this protocol in place, somebody says, oh, we can do this in a different way, so we make a fork. If you look at any evolutionary tree in biology, in the way we perceive the world, you will find exactly the same. You will find forking. Forking is an evolutionary mechanism, and that's what we are seeing out there. So if you haven't contemplated the nature of Bitcoin as a DAO, as a distributed or decentralized autonomous organization, then I really think you should, because that is extremely important. And I think that when we look at the Bitcoin DAO, we are seeing an archetype of new organizations that is going to emerge that are decentralized. And the decentralized perspective is probably the most singular, the most important perspective when we talk about blockchain. I know there's a lot of talk about permission blockchains and permissionless blockchains and so on, but at the end of the day, the element of decentralization is really one of the fundamental forces that is driving Bitcoin forward. So in the EU system, this of course is you can say something which is coming into the line of sight, and that's why EU takes an interest in not only Bitcoin, because I mean Bitcoin was generation 1, but in blockchain in general. So what has happened is that within the EU there is emerging a perception of this as a new economic system, and that's a big thing. So in recent years you can say that blockchain has entered the line of sight of EU and is moving upwards the agenda that puts this into a political and an economical context as well. So within the EU system, which is of course across the Commission and the Parliament and all the different institutions and of course all the links they have to all the national parliaments within EU, there is a narrative that is starting to emerge, a really fascinating and interesting narrative. And that narrative takes the form of a realization that blockchain is the next layer, or the next protocol, if you want, of the internet. That this is something which is equally as important and as significant as the situation we had in the late 90s, where we saw the World Wide Web emerge, and we saw companies as Amazon and Google and Facebook and so on taking their first steps. If you look at the American stock index, the majority of the largest companies over there were created on the basis of what happened in the late 90s when the World Wide Web was introduced. And some of you, I can see, probably have an age where you can remember it and was a part of it, and to others, you know, the World Wide Web is just a natural thing that is there. So the narrative that is developing is a narrative of transformation and change, and of course a challenge, because this is challenging the way that we understand processes. One of the most fundamental aspects of this narrative is the recognition that blockchain is moving trust, transfer, and settlement to the internet. Today, when we look at trust, transfer, and settlement, which is, you know, a very fundamental thing for the financial sector as such, it is happening in centralized systems. It is happening you can say, outside of the internet. When we connect ourselves to the internet and we do transactions, those transactions are not happening there on the internet. It's happening on other systems that is interfaced to the internet. So trust, transfer, and settlement is something which is very significant, and it's absolutely worthwhile contemplating what it is. Because what it is that it's the essential of making a contract. Think about it, any kind of contract we have, being complex contract, building a spaceship, or being the contract that we are actually fulfilling when we go down and take a pound of butter in the retail, at the retail store, is actually one that creates, a contract is one that creates how do we establish trust, what are the rules for the resource transfer that we're doing, and how are we going to settle it. Settle is, of course, payment and finalization of the transaction that we make. So this is the overall proposition that blockchain comes with, is to decentralize trust, transfer, and settlement. And I read a report the other day made by some people from a university in US, where they were looking at and say, okay, what is the cost of trust? What does it actually cost us that we need to trust each other? And we need to have sort of centralized aspects, including in that trust process. And they showed that more than 20% of the total American employment market was employed by people who are working trust. And I'm not saying that we're not going to work with trust going forward. I'm just saying that trust is something which is really difficult to manage and has been really difficult and very, very expensive to manage across the financial sector, across political systems and so on. So we're going to see this being discussed, and this is what is being discussed in the EU, is exactly what is the consequence of this? What will happen when we enter a world where these three aspects of doing anything, politically or financially or business-wise, they are becoming decentralized. So the notion of decentralization is probably one of the most important things to get when we talk about blockchain. Also, what is more and more clear is that what drives this, as I mentioned, is decentralization, but also the aspect of transparency. Because, as you probably know, a blockchain system creates transparency. It's if you look at take Bitcoin or Ethereum or anything else, you can see all the transactions. You can't see all the parties or identify the specific parties, but you can see all the transactions and you can backtrack on the data. So that is transparency. And what does transparency bring to a system? It brings quality decisions, because all the decisions we make, they are of course made on the basis of data. The better the quality we have in the data that we're using for decision making, the better the quality the decisions will have. And then of course this is driven by the force of effectivization, which shows itself up as an effort to reduce friction in processes. And blockchain offers a lot of process friction reduction. It offers to reduce the need for middlemen in transactions. It offers the need for reducing those who, for instance, are needed to create trust between two parties for them to interact. So this narrative is actually the one that is emerging within the European Union. And this is what is being discussed not only in the Blockchain Observatory, but also across different institutions in the EU. Please ask questions, by the way, if you have any on the way here. So, if I'm to exemplify this a bit and take a look at what do they say there? What is being said about blockchain in EU? Then let me refer to Maria Gabriel. She is the EU Commissioner for Digital Economy and Society. And she believes, for instance, that all public services going forward will be supported by the blockchain. And of course, that's an important thing, because most of what we do, most of the systems that we are navigating and using, they have some sort of component that is very often is related to a public system. It could be for authentication. You all know NemID. It could be for VAT. It could be for taxation, etc., etc. So she believes that this is actually going to be a backbone for public services going forward. She also argues that EU should pursue a digital single market for blockchain, and that the landscapes that we know of should be rethinked, and that one thing which is really important in what is happening in the EU Commission is the realization that the data that we create, they should of course belong to us as individuals, or to us as entities, I'd rather say, because a company and any an institution and so on can also be generating data. But we have to look at the way that data is managed, especially personal data, and we have to look at ways to monetize that management and security of data, which has a high profile within the EU Commission. Also, there is a realization that a new business around blockchain is emerging. And already now, if you look at the global blockchain business, it's a multi-billion-dollar business. You can just look at the valuations of the different cryptos. You can see the size or the number of people who are actually working as developers and business developers and and every other thing within blockchain. And it's thousands of people all over the world, tens of thousands of people actually all over the world. So it's a huge new industry that is in the making. And of course EU has a specific interest in being attractive to that industry. So there are also thinking going on within the EU of how can we actually be attractive to this new industry that is emerging. So in the Commission, there is a realization that legislation and regulation has to incorporate knowledge about blockchain and its implications. And there's been taking a lot of steps to address that, and I will return to some more details in that in a minute. So I think it's fair to say that blockchain has a very prominent place within the EU system, the EU Commission, sorry, and that it's being taken very seriously. And we also find you can say, or rather I'd say we can sort of take out of that and out of those processes happening in the Commission, we can look at those that are most relevant to the financial sector. So I'll try to sort of get into that here. So one thing that is being addressed is of course KYC. You all know about KYC, know your customer. It's a highly regulated field. There's a lot of pressure on those being actors within the financial sector on doing KYC. If you fail in your KYC, it can have grave consequences because you can get fined, and you can get fined with some very large amounts of money and so on. So KYC is an extremely expensive process. If you look at Nordea, for instance, they have hundreds of people just doing KYC, perhaps even more. So if you look across the financial sector of Europe, billions of dollars is being spent every year on doing exactly the same processes, exactly the same KYC processes. So one of the scenarios that we're discussing is, okay, can we create a new form of blockchain-based identity scheme where we can put in verified credentials that can be reused across the financial sector? So imagine that you had one digital identity, one blockchain-based sovereign digital identity that you could populate with verified credentials. Then that could be used for managing KYC processes within the financial sector. So once you had it in one place, you could actually reuse it in another place. Yes?
Why do you think we need blockchain for that?
Pardon?
Why do you think we need to use the blockchain for that?
I'm not advocating that this has to be blockchain.
Okay.
But in EU, what is being said is that the belief is the following, that going forward, identity will be a self-sovereign type of identity. That means that you have your own, you create your own space, you can say, on the blockchain. And in order to make this secure, in order to make it generally available, it should be on a technology that isn't central. It should be decentralized by nature. And I think that's the prime argument being used within EU for promoting this idea of self-sovereignty as a way to reduce the cost of KYC. Because, I mean, if you do it in a central way,
you will always need someone to check the documents you're sending, right?
Yeah, exactly.
The point you're saying is that you just need to do it one time so that you can use it for thousands of companies if you need to collaborate with thousands of companies. The point is that anyway you can pick a private company that do it for you and that could collaborate with all those other companies. So
I agree. And I think the future is not a totally decentralized future, because totally decentralization is just anarchy. Okay? And it is, by definition. I think that what we're looking at is some sort of hybrid, and I'm positively sure that the kind of platforms, blockchain platforms, that we will use going forward will have a built-in KYC ID-ready structure that enables you to know that on this blockchain there's only known actors. Mm-hmm. Okay? Yes?
Well, that brings it a little bit back to something that I thought about, because you mentioned that a great part of the blockchain is the level of trust. There has to be trust. And I believe that's an easy thing to use in technology. I mean, there's a lot of givens and a lot of standards that you but behind every transaction there is a person.
Yes.
So do you trust your counterparty?
Yes.
I mean, because you can't trust a person.
No.
So how does that go hand in hand with technology that lives on the basis of trust?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, at the end of the day, what you're saying is that what we need is to ensure the establishment of trust between party A and party B, so they can execute some sort of contract.
Yeah.
And you can say that there are risks related to that contract execution, but there's also a risk, as of now, because you spend a lot of money, you spend a lot of resources in establishing this trust. So the argument here is that the cost of establishing trust will go down, because that is one of the propositions that is inherent within a blockchain design. But eliminating that, you can say that the need of trust, or eliminating risk, I don't think that's going to happen. I think that is going to stick around. The other thing that I would like to mention here, which I believe personally is extremely interesting, is the emergence of programmable money. What is programmable money? It's money that knows what it's supposed to be spent for. It's money that can go back to where it came from if it isn't spent for that purpose it was designated to. Yes?
But again, what do you need blockchain technology for that? I mean, programmable money, programs on it that are executed on a database, that's...
I'm not arguing that this
no, but
has
you're
to
saying
be...
it in the context of why the EU is interested in this.
Yes, one of the things that is being looked at within EU right now is a DLT-based e-euro. Okay? Is that a blockchain thing?
No, it's probably run by
I don't
the
know.
European Central Bank.
Exactly. So I'm just arguing that I'm in. When I talk about blockchain, I'm just talking about the concept of digitizing these very important things. So what we are looking at in the Blockchain Observatory is that how is this technology enabling, as one way of doing things, enabling us to do stuff going forward. So we are not saying that going forward, e-money or e-euro or e-kroner has to be on a specific blockchain type. We're just arguing that could be something that you could use blockchain for. Yes?
Maybe a quick answer to that question would be that blockchains or distributed ledger technologies are the only ones that have found out a secure way to prevent double spending. So if you just have a database that issues its own currency, then there's no way to prevent double spending, and therefore the currency is not valid. So I think that would be the main answer to that.
Yeah. I have to. In the Parliament, maybe. Back in October, the EU Parliament produced a resolution that was voted through the EU Parliament on blockchain, and I would really recommend anyone who has an interest in understanding how is actually the thinking within the EU Parliament to read that resolution, because it holds, I think, 65 or 50 different recommendations to the Commission and to the EU system. And what they're saying, these parliamentarians, which are very much ahead of the game when we talk about blockchain. If you look at what they are saying and you say, okay, what does that tell us about their understanding of this emerging technology, then I would definitely say that they are ahead of many of us. They are really, in the top 1% in terms of understanding what it is that we are looking at. So at October 3rd last year, they put this resolution through the Parliament, and there was a number of recommendations, and I just want to mention a few of them. One of them that I personally think is really interesting is that they are saying that we want, we want to push the incorporation of cryptocurrencies into the European payment systems. We want payments going forward to also encompass cryptocurrencies, and I think that's a very, very significant thing. And there's no doubt that what is going to make blockchain a utility, that is the availability of wallets. Everybody has to have a wallet. The wallet is to the blockchain what the browser is to the internet. So once wallets start to proliferate and get, it's out there on our mobile phones and our PCs, etc., then of course we're going to see some of the other use cases within the blockchain space. They will start to be realized. So that is one of the important things, I think, going forward. Also, of course, as we are in EU, there is a lot of interest in terms of how can we decentralize the storage of the data of the individual, how can we protect the individual going forward, and how can we use blockchain to track EU funding so that it isn't, redirected or spent on something which it shouldn't be spent on. How can we use blockchain to introduce more direct democracy in nation states by doing e-voting and using e-voting systems, etc. So if you want to understand, go find that resolution. So along with this, we also have some specific initiatives. Last year there was made a blockchain declaration for 24 countries within the EU. Actually it's 25 because Denmark was not in the first round. We wasn't present. It was an error, and then we were there in the second round. So now 25 countries has actually signed this blockchain declaration, and what they are looking at is to establish a European blockchain services infrastructure. This is very important, and it's very important work, and anyone working with blockchain should absolutely take an interest in this, because this will translate into standardization going forward. So the notion of EBSI is something which is growing quite fast. And I'm almost running out of time, so I'll just use 1 minute to tell you more about what we do in the EU Blockchain Observatory. These are the things we're working with. The EU Master Chain, we work with GDPR, we work with identity, we work with, and especially identity. Identity is, in my view, it is the most singular, most important use case for blockchain going forward. Identity is an evolution from KYC to personal or entity identity to become something like a digital twin that we will use to manage different things, different important things in our life. And also, of course, we have a realization within the Blockchain Observatory that there is a general need to bring people on board the blockchain thinking, that it takes a while before top politicians and top management, CXOs, top institutions, etc. actually understand what it is that we're looking at, and most truly don't yet understand what it is that we're looking at. In the observatory, the financial industry is quite strongly represented. We have the heads of blockchain from Deutsche Bank and HSBC, from Nordea, Santander, etc., etc. So the big banks, the big financial institutions, they are very vested in this and spend a lot of resources on influencing this development. So just to wrap up, there is a really interesting narrative that is emerging within EU. It has some significant, very significant impact on many different subjects, and I think that here in Denmark we should really ramp up too. And I can see that the other guys, they are actually moving faster than we are, and it's starting to become a problem. There is a gap between what is happening down there and what is happening within our systems here in Denmark, within the Danish financial sector and within the Danish political system. So we need a new kind of conversation, and we need a sense of urgency, because all of these things are happening. So those are the words. I won't be able to say more now, so any questions? Okay, in that case, thank you.